Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that little ditty. You're going to hear, every time you come to any of our events, you're going to hear that. It's actually the wonder of AI. So we had a staff away day, and I said, we'd like to create our own jingle. So 6 teams created each one, and this is the one that won. And so you will have it at every event, every video. It's about our branding. It's inspirational, is what the gentleman that actually crafted this was that, and AI created it for us. So anyway, enough of that. Very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Chief Spokesperson, and Chief Operating Officer at Friends of Europe, and have the privilege of moderating this timely, important, political discussion about energy and climate change. We have the great privilege of having a personality, a character that's been on the world stage, speaking boldly, directly, truth to power, on many, many occasions. And you know who I'm talking about. He's the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, who is with us. This is after the Paris launch, so today it's a real privilege that we have exclusively the launch of the report that he'll be speaking to with us at Friends of Europe. It's been a long-term relationship. I think it's been over 15 years. I've only been with the organisation about 6, but I know that Fatih has been an annual character on the Friends of Europe platform, introducing the World Energy Outlook report. And so this is a warm gathering again, post-COVID, because the last time him and I were able to be in person was just before COVID struck. So it's a great pleasure to have him back in person. Just a few words by way of introduction into what the flow will be. Fatih will speak for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and then what we'll do is have a Q&A. Please don't be spectators and passive recipients. Please engage if you can, otherwise I'll just pick on you. Because the point of this conversation is to really having such a personality with so much knowledge and experience. Don't waste the opportunity and put your hands up and engage in a conversation. What we'd like you to do, though, no stump speeches. What would be great is if you've got questions or you've got ideas and for things for solutions or ideas for what could happen. Because all of us know what the problems are. We do enough chest beating, and now actually even the IPCC reports that are coming out are farcical because they don't have any clout anymore. Because even though they're saying time is running out, our political leaders don't seem to be able to understand that. 50 years ago, a crisis in the energy field created the International Energy Agency. 50 years later, we are in a similar, if not more, deeper, wider, potentially long-term crisis that's been precipitated not only by the Ukraine war and the dependency on Russia for energy, which actually I remember Fatih warned against many, many years ago, but here you go. People don't listen. Only adversity seems to actually shove people into the right direction. But here we are 50 years later, and the occasion now, it's very clear that at that 50 years ago, we were clear there was a geopolitical rationale for that crisis. 50 years later, we still seem to not have learned the lessons about how there is a nexus of energy supply, demand, and geopolitics. And what we need to do is disentangle that if we are to move forward. By 2030, we need to triple our renewable capacity, and we need to double what we do in terms of actual efficiency, energy efficiency. So that's quite a task. By 2030, tripling our renewable capacity and doubling our energy efficiency by 2030. That's only 6 years away, colleagues. And what we know, as you know, only too well, that the extremities of weather change and climate impact is getting much more real. Before it was somewhere else, now it's on our doorstep, and everyone is seeing, whether you're in Spain, whether you're in, the east of Europe, temperatures have changed fundamentally, and the rate and the rapidity of us experiencing extremities is increasing. That has an impact on local communities, especially those who are in the poorest housing, will actually suffer the most in these circumstances. But we also know that that's going to have a huge impact on the economy, but also people's livelihoods. So those are the stakes, those are the issues that we really need to attend to. And so I'm going to invite Fatih to come and join me on the stage, so he's able to explain the latest report and what the key messages we all need to be listening to if we're going to get our acts together by 2030, if not before. Fatih, very much. Very welcome to you to join me on the stage here. Very good to have you. Please.
So very many thanks for this kind words, and thanks once again, Friends of Europe, for hosting us. You said 15 years. It's a really long time, and I am very happy to be back with, again, the same intention to share our views about the global energy picture and try to provide some insights for the next years to come. Yes, we released our report yesterday to the international press in Paris. I was together with Lara Cosi and Tim Gould, who were the two lead authors of this report with a big team. And I am very happy that Lara, who is our new director for technology and outlooks, is with me today. So, dear colleagues, we cannot talk about anything in the world today without thinking about what is going to happen in Middle East. So this is a key area, especially when you talk about the energy. The current crisis in the major geopolitical crisis in the Middle East can well lead to an oil price shock, as there are many key oil exporters in the region. About 1/3 of the global oil exports come from the very region. And we know that from that region, from Hormuz Strait, a big chunk of the global oil and LNG, liquefied natural gas, is transported from that Hormuz Strait. So, of course, we don't know who will be involved, who will not be involved, but I can tell you that the oil markets are on edge, and following what will happen in the next days to come. And we are already experiencing $90 oil prices, already very tight markets. And you may not feel very much in Europe, but $90 oil price is a big problem in developing and emerging countries where they import oil and gas, and for the economic growth and for the inflation numbers. So this crisis is, again, oil crisis after 50 years, as you rightly mentioned, might be with us, back to us again. And once again, if you think, almost 2 years ago, we had another crisis, natural gas crisis in Europe. This time, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was the main driver. Cutting off the Russian gas supply meant a lot of economic difficulties for Europeans and for many other nations around the world, because Russia at that time was the #1 natural gas exporter of the world. If they're out of the system, then you have major, of course, shock waves. So think about, if we can think a bit, what's happening with oil now. Availability of oil, price of oil can go up or down, the volatility. If you think about what happened with natural gas only 2 years ago, I think, in my view, it will be difficult to say that the oil and gas represent safe choices for the consumers around the world. They are very much interwoven with the politics, geopolitical development. And on top of this, the geopolitical issues, if we put the climate crisis we are facing today, and if we all know that the big chunk of the emissions causing the climate crisis come from the fossil fuel burning. So putting all of these things together, it will be difficult, in my view, to claim that the oil, gas, in general, fossil fuels represent a safe and secure choice for energy for the consumers and the nations worldwide. So this is the frame that we are in today, and I can tell you that I believe in the next weeks and months to come, it will be a key topic for all of us. And in that context, I have three concerns, the current situation, what it can cause. Number one, in terms of the global economy, if one or more than one major oil producer, exporter is directly involved in the crisis, it will have major implications on the markets. This is one concern on the oil markets. The second concern I have is on the political side. Rightly so, there is a lot of attention by the policymakers, international community on this very issue. When we watch the news, when we read the papers, when we talk with the people. And this attention, I hope, will not lead to losing some attention from another major issue, namely the situation in Ukraine. So this is another worry I have. This is the second concern I am seeing in the light of this current geopolitical context. The third concern I have is, again, the current situation, I would say the burning situation in the Middle East may lead to lose focus on our climate issue and the COP28, which is only a few weeks from now, which meant to be a major forum to get some serious outcomes. I will come to that in a moment. But on a political level, these are the three concerns I have. The immediate crisis, if a major oil exporter is directly involved, if we forget Ukraine and the concerns about Ukraine and our climate crisis. Having said that, the World Energy Outlook, working with thousands and tens of thousands of data, investors, governments, came up with a hopeful, in my view, hopeful message. It is the following. It says, the outlook, even with the current policies, even if there are no new climate-friendly, clean energy-friendly policies come in the picture in the next years to come, even with the current policies, the global energy picture in 2030 will look very different than what we have today. Very strong point. And when I look at how different it will be, why it will be different, there are many strong and very clear data points. I want to share from different parts of the energy, the four of them with you. The first one is the transportation sector, which is a major consumer of oil, consumer use of energy. Only 3 years ago, 1 out of 25 cars sold in the world was electric. So 1 out of 25 only 3 years ago. This year, it is 1 out of 5 cars sold is electric. And 2030, says the World Energy Outlook, in 2030, every second car, almost every second car sold will be an electric car. And you will see millions of electric cars in the streets of the world. And this is based on the discussions with the many car manufacturers, their plans, their strategies, and government policies and others. So this is a major change here. Second, on the electricity generation. We said since 14 years, 15 years we make this event, and years, fossil fuels dominated how we generate electricity globally. 10 years ago, only 10 years ago, 70% of global electricity generation came from fossil fuels, 70%. Now, this year, it is less than 60%, the share of fossil fuels. And 2030, it will go down to 40%. So 60% in 2030 will be fossil fuel free, and 40% fossil fuels, from 70% to 40%. And once again, dear colleagues, please bear in mind, this is on the basis of even there are no new climate-friendly policies, clean energy policies coming into picture. I believe personally, a lot of them will come. So these are, if you wish, these are really on the pessimistic side. And why it is happening, why the fossil fuel share is coming down? Because the renewables are dominating the game, and in some countries we also see nuclear power is making a comeback. So this is the second change in 2030, why it looks different. Third, home heating. It is a very important part of global energy consumption, especially in the countries in Europe, North America, in Asia, China, in Japan, Korea, and so on. What we see is in the next few years, the heat pump, the sales of heat pump and electrical heaters will overtake the sales of fossil fuel boilers, which have dominated the home heating for decades. Big growth of heat pumps and electrical heaters, and they will be selling more than the fossil fuel boilers. Another change, which is the implication, again, on the use of fossil fuels. Fourth and the last point I want to give you is on money, finance. I came here from a meeting on the wind. And offshore wind is very important for Europe, so I give an example on offshore wind. Globally, this year, amount of investment going to offshore wind is half of the investment going to gas and coal-fired power plants put together. So it's half of it today. But now, looking at already FIDs, the projects, the investment, the financing flow, we can comfortably say that at least the investment going to offshore wind will be at least 3 times higher in 2030 than the investment going to gas and coal plants. Big growth there in terms of the clean energy investments. So these are some 4 data points in different parts of the energy sector. There are many other excellent data points, very clear, very solid numbers. And again, I want to say once again, these are all based on the current policies. If COP28, if Europe, United States, China, India, other countries come up with more clean energy policies, the numbers I give you will be more on the conservative side. Even with these conservative assumptions, ladies and gentlemen, we see that since decades, for the first time, the consumption, the use of fossil fuels, this decade, they are going to peak. First coal, followed by oil and followed by natural gas. They will peak. It doesn't mean that they will disappear and decline immediately with the current policies, but they come to a peak. No more growth for fossil fuel use, even with the conservative picture, global picture, I am telling you. And it has major implications for many players. You must have heard, you must have read, many oil companies are discussing this issue. What does it mean? There are billions of trillions of dollars oil companies are having discussions with the rather modest International Energy Agency on this issue, but our numbers are solid and our numbers are very well proven. Having said that, I want to tell you what it doesn't mean, the peak, with the current policies. First of all, it doesn't mean that with the current policies we are reaching our climate targets. Even there is a peak and slight decline afterwards use of fossil fuels means global temperature increase will be still in line with 2.4 degrees Celsius, much higher than 1.5 that we would like to reach, so therefore we need much stronger policies. Second, global peak doesn't mean that the fossil fuel consumption in all the countries will peak. We still see, especially for oil and gas, in developing countries, increasing use of oil and gas for years to come, but globally it will peak. Third, it doesn't mean that since oil and gas will peak, we don't need any more investment in oil and gas, because the oil and gas, we have colleagues from the several international oil companies here to make it clear. We still need investment in oil and gas in order to meet the demand, which is going to decline, but still there. We have to supply that oil and gas, which is in a decline. Plus, a lot of oil and gas fields are mature fields, and they are declining. In order to compensate that, we still need investments for oil and gas, but in a reduced manner compared to the previous hikes. So this is the picture we see when it comes to the fossil fuels and the energy system. I believe this decade will be looking at this peak of the fossil fuels will be a turning point in the history of energy as a result of the factors I mentioned to you. I would like to move to another important finding of the World Energy Outlook. It's about the natural gas markets. Merci beaucoup. Natural gas markets, because natural gas is a very important issue for Europe and, of course, for the world. We just went through a period of, and we are not off the hook in terms of natural gas supply. In my view, we are paying one of the historical mistakes that the European countries did, over-reliance for one single fuel on one single country. We are paying for that. But now, the news is the following. Again, looking at the project by project across the world, our numbers show that there is a sea change in the global natural gas markets. Why? Because a number of new LNG capacity is coming to the market, mainly from United States and Qatar. So just to put in a context, the amount of new LNG as of 2025, coming to the market is about 50% than we have today. It's equal to 50% what we have today will come in a few years to the markets. US and Qatar are the main drivers for that. And what does this mean, so much LNG starting from 2025 coming to markets? It means many things. First, the security of gas supply concerns will ease. That's number one. Number two, there will be a downward pressure under natural gas prices, and the markets will turn to days from the seller's market to a buyer's market in the second half of this decade. And this would mean that especially for Russia, the country, in my view, who made also a strategic mistake, having only one major customer, lost it for good, I think, will have some challenges there. So this is on the side of the gas markets, and I think it is something important for all of us to think, as in a few years of time, gas security still important, but getting a new dimension with a lot of LNG coming, and you may have read in the newspapers that Russia, after losing Europe, now wants to go to Asia, China and the others, but coming so much LNG, getting LNG is much easier to building new pipelines throughout the difficult geographies. So it is an important news from a geopolitical context as well. My last two messages coming from the very rich report put together with Laura and her colleagues is the following. China. I think the energy circles are not paying enough attention as it deserves what is happening in the Chinese economy. Because, dear colleagues, when you look at the last 10 years, China has changed the energy markets on oil, gas, coal. Just to give you very simple, why China is so important to understand China. In the last 10 years, more than 2/3 of the global oil consumption growth came from China. Can you think of another important determinant of oil markets? Once again, more than 2/3 of the global oil consumption growth came from China only. More than 1/3 of the natural gas consumption growth came from China. And when it comes to coal, I don't need to say China was by far the largest player. And many institutions, many energy companies have missed that period. IEA didn't, because we knew what was happening in China, Chinese economy. And now, once again, this time, China, the country that has changed the energy markets, is changing itself. When you look at the Chinese economy, in the last 10 years, the country that drove the global energy consumption, economy increased over 6%, 6.2% on average per year. And everybody now expects in the next years to come, next 10 years, the consensus views it is much lower than that. Some people say 3, some people say 4, but the 2-3 percentage point of Chinese economy changes everything. Okay? Second, maybe even more importantly, Chinese economy, as Chinese government says themselves, is rebalancing. Chinese steel production is in a decline. Chinese cement production is in a decline. The households, the construction of households, it came to a certain saturation level. China, the floor space per capita in China is now similar to the European countries, higher than Japan. So it came to a certain saturation. So what I'm saying this is China doesn't need huge amount of energy. It's becoming lighter instead of the energy intensive. So therefore, China's economy changing has a lot of implication for the where the global energy markets go, and it is one of the reasons why we think that we may see the peak of oil, gas, and coal, in addition to what is happening on the clean energy domain. And we think that the Chinese energy consumption will peak sometime at the mid this decade, around 2025. But I should also mention that China is not only will consume less oil, gas, and coal, but also the champion of clean energy around the world. China is today #1 in solar, #1 in wind, #1 in hydropower, #1 in electric cars, and #1 in building new nuclear power plants. I can go and go and go. So this is an important issue that we understand what is happening in China, to understand what will happen in the global energy markets. My last point is on the climate change and the COP. First of all, again, with the current policies, without any new policies, we think global emissions will peak by 2025. This is a good news, but again, peak is not enough. One needs to see a decline of the emissions, because just with the current policies, as I said, even there is a peak there, we are in line with the 2.4 degrees Celsius temperature increase, and many of you know better than me that this year set to be the hottest year in the history, mainly driven by the use of fossil fuels. So therefore, we are, as the rest of the world, very hopeful that the COP28 provides some good outcomes. It is the reason why we work closely with the COP28 presidency. We are organizing several high-level dialogue meetings, we say, with the several government leaders in different parts of the world, together with the chaired by Sultan Al-Jabbar, the COP president, and myself, trying to have a convergence among the countries. But while we work constructively with the COP28 presidency as IEA, we are very clear what we are going to endorse, what we are not going to endorse, what we think is a successful outcome, what we think is not a successful outcome. So from our point of view, to consider COP28 as a successful meeting, we have in the World Energy Outlook, you will see there are many metrics we have, but for me, there are 5 conditions need to be in place if we were to consider COP28 as a successful one. For me, it is as important, COP28, as the Paris we had in 2015 Paris Agreement. So what are those 5 areas that we are going to compare with the outcomes of the COP28 and say, and take our position? It was a good, successful meeting, which we hope it will be or not. The first one is, between now and 2030, tripling of the renewable capacity. Renewables are going very well in most of the countries, and even with our current policies, they grow slightly more than double between now and 2030, but we want to see tripling of the governments agree and confirm this. Second, again based on our analysis, doubling of the energy efficiency improvements. Currently, global energy efficiency improves about 2% per year. We want to see it's about 4% per year. This is the second one. Third, oil and gas companies Many oil and gas companies leaders say publicly that they would like to be a part of the solution. Climate change is very important for them. So it is very good. We are very happy to hear that. But now we want to see that they commit to Paris targets and align their strategies with the Paris outcomes, including committing themselves between now and 2030, reducing their methane emissions by 75%, which is an easy gain here to make this. Fourth, again for us an important area, advanced economies and international financial institutions come up with the financing mechanisms to support the clean energy transition in emerging and developing countries. They will not be able to do it by themselves. So there's a need for support for them, as the cost of capital in many of those countries are much higher than in the advanced world, and we have to find some de-risking mechanisms to support them. This is the fourth one. Fifth and the last one is we would like to see that the governments put in place measures for a orderly decline of fossil fuel use. You can't, on one hand, have lots of using fossil fuels. On the other hand, we want to reach the 1.5 or any climate target. So we would like the governments to have an orderly decline of fossil fuels, starting with having a ban for building any new coal-fired power plants. So these are the 5 criteria we have. You may think that they are really tough ones, but what can we do? We are just, as IEA, we are just translators. We look at what the scientists tell us, 1.5, what is the carbon budget left there, and what is the problem? Problem is the fossil fuels. We are just translators, the so-called innocent translator. We just make a translate from the climate to energy and what needs to happen. And this is the issue. And maybe I finish by saying that, in my view, to reach those 5 or to fulfill these conditions, I believe globally there is no economic challenge. Global capital we have. There is no technology challenge. We have all the technologies I told you, they are already available everywhere. There is no problem there. And there is no challenge in terms of potential. The challenge, in my view, there are many of them, but if I have to pick up one of them, this is the challenge of the lack of international cooperation. Unfortunately, this COP28 comes at a time where the international fragmentation is very, very strong. And when you address a global problem, which is in the interest of everybody to solve, the thing that you need the most is the international collaboration, and we are lacking it today. And it is the reason the IEA is working with all the countries around the world, from US, Canada, Latin America, Europeans, India, China, Africa, and the others, and having empathy for their position, try to build the international collaboration among the countries, and we very much hope that the Dubai will be a successful one. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
As ever, rich, a lot to consume and make sense of. But characteristically, IEA, together with Laura and Fatih, they always come up with these 5 things or these 3 things. But we need that clarity, we need that sharpness, and actually we need that simplicity in this complex, politically troubled world that we're living in at the moment. And I wouldn't ever regard you as an innocent translator. You're a bold translator. We need you to be bolder, actually, in that regard, personally, in terms of where COP is likely to turn out. And let's hope that world leaders listen to what you have to say, but also understand what the stakes are, and if you don't act, what the consequences will be. We have very little time, and I want to make sure as many of you as possible are able to come in. We've allowed a lot of time for Fatih, because that was a very interesting and very, I suppose, sophisticated analysis of both trends, geopolitics, and what needs to happen. And it takes a lot of time for us to process that, but I want to give you this space. But I know Matthew is in the audience here. Matthew, there's a mic coming your way. Matthew is a Deputy Director General in DG Climate. I think it's important, and I'll bring you all in, I promise you. But it's important to get European Commission reaction to what we don't have the Commissioner here, but we have you, Matthew.
A poor substitute.
No, that wasn't to say you're a poor substitute.
I am indeed a poor substitute. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much to Friends of Europe for keeping up this wonderful tradition of hosting the World Energy Outlooks. Thank you, Dr. Barol, for a really fascinating presentation. We're very proud in the Commission to support the work you do in the World Energy Outlook for a number of years now. We're very happy to be continuing to do that. So many things I wanted to comment on, and I know time is short, so I'll try and limit it to just a few points. Firstly, I fully agree with what you said about the need to keep the focus on what could happen in the Middle East, to keep the focus on Ukraine, and above all, perhaps, the need to keep that strong focus on COP28. And indeed, I go back to a previous report that you published, the Net Zero Roadmap on the 29th of September, which confirmed that this famous pathway limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees is feasible, but it's narrow, and we have to step up our policy ambition. We have to boost investment in clean technology. And in that context, the focus that you have just placed on, and we strongly agree with you on the goals for tripling the global installed capacity of renewables, doubling the global rate of energy efficiency improvements by 2030, that is indeed a very important focus for us all at the head of the COP. And so we thank you in return for the strong support you've given us for this global pledge, as we're calling it, that we've been pushing very hard on in the Commission, working very hard with the COP presidency to push these objectives. I think today's outlook presents us all, policymakers, businesses, citizens, with really timely and welcome analytical insights and indeed implications in terms of our policy. But you also, Dr. Barol, acknowledged and recognized, and I thank you for it, what we've been doing in Europe and the struggle we've been going through as part of a global struggle to reduce the shock from Russia's weaponization of natural gas in 2030 and to stabilize the markets. And just very quickly wanted to point out that partly as a result of those efforts, we have full natural gas storages. It's good to see Paolo Pino, who's been masterminding that effort. We've overachieved on our targets for natural gas demand reduction. We diversified our supply. The numbers are remarkable. In 2021, we had 155 billion cubic meters of gas coming in from Russia. That number is now down to 40 in a very short space of time. We've record levels of renewables, 56 gigawatts in 2022. I hope you've seen the release of our wind power strategy this week. So we're continuing to pile on the pressure. And if you look at this globally, this has reduced Russia's ability to weaponize energy and try to leverage the European Union and leverage the rest of the world. There is no contradiction between this fight and delivering on the Green Deal. Indeed, actually delivering on the Green Deal is the best way, particularly in the medium and the long term, the best way to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels from Russia.
Matthew, if I may, I'm sorry.
I know,
time is running out. But what I wanted you to do is, could you just focus on what's the EU's key message going to be as you enter COP28? What are you going to be saying?
Well, exactly that. I would underline particularly that global pledge, that tripling on renewables and that doubling of energy efficiency. That's a global target. I think you mentioned, Dr. Borrell, not every country is going to go at the same rate. It's a global target, not a country commitment. So a lot of countries like China, like your own country of Turkey, could and perhaps should look at these things, and we'll be working with partners from across the world to try to get there. If I could just pose a question, because I think that's a role. I'd like to draw together 3 strands from what you said about, firstly, the increased global supply of LNG from the mid part of this decade, China's apparent change in structure of its demand, and indeed your challenge to everyone to cut down on to get to peak emissions from fossil. If you take that together and also picking up your remarks about methane, what scope do you think there's going to be for essentially buying countries like the EU, indeed like China, like Japan, to really start picking and choosing a bit between the kind of gas we're buying, precisely in terms of that methane content, and therefore actually accelerating the drive towards cleaner gas as gas works its way through on the transition. So apologies,
Great.
my question was long as well my remarks, but thank you for your...
Don't worry. I want to give space to others. It was important to have, hear you. And thank you for saying that the message is going to be about the tripling and doubling. I think that's going to become a phrase for COP, clearly. There's a lady just behind you who's had her hand up first, and then we had 2 gentlemen, and then yourselves. What's happened to here on the left-hand side? Why are you all so passive? Are all the active actors here? Okay, I'll come to you. So, firstly, go on. I'll take 3 first.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Fatih. I'm Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, co-president of the Club of Rome and also ambassador of the Energy Transition Commission. And it's a real pleasure to see the leadership that the IEA has taken. So a great deal of gratitude. We've been following, obviously, and working together on your outlooks for many, many years. But what I'm seeing that's different in your approach, and that's where I want to get to, is the fact that there are still many caveats to ensuring that we do radically reduce our emissions, even though we are making progress. And so I want to get to those caveats and ask you a few questions, because I know that you're playing a very deep leadership role in trying to bring together the national oil companies as well as the private sector to come to a deal around phase down. And so I wanted to ask a question around how optimistic can we be in getting a deal on phase down or phase out? How optimistic can we be in getting a deal on fossil fuel subsidy eradication? How optimistic can we be in getting Europe to continue to support phase down, by the way? And the final point is, as we also had a very deep letter, myself and Johan Rockström, Laurence Toubiana and others, around the need for bringing science back into the negotiations, because the science is changing all the time, and we're seeing it very clearly. How can we ensure that we continue to bring the science back in when we look at the economics, and we also look, obviously, at the fossil energy results and what we're trying to get to? Thank you very much.
Before you give up the mic,
Yes.
how hopeful are you of the next COP? You are an institution that's really well regarded. You have a lot of the old guys, mostly old guys, who've been really senior in your club. What's your sense of optimism?
So I have to be honest that I've written several op-eds around the fact that the COP has become a circus. We will have 70,000 people coming to the COP.
Indeed.
It has become a trade show. I'm optimistic when we get the negotiators in a room truly negotiating around the content and understanding the fact that this is an urgency. But we do have a sultan in power who represents a country that has continued to extract. We do have private sector companies that are continuing to make huge windfall profits, and Chevron has just declared that it will continue to excavate. So upstream is still happening. Many investments are still going in that direction. Pressure not to come with a deal on fossil is huge.
Sure.
Can the Sultan stand up to the plate with the help of Fatih and others? That's what I'm hopeful for.
Okay, but it's important that people like yourselves and other leaders actually call it out, that this circus has to stop and be more action and move from rhetoric to action. Thank you very much.
We'll continue to call it out.
Please do. We'll come, no, not yet. There's a lady right at the back with a green jacket. Then I'll come to yourselves. And you are still very passive on the left. Lady there in the green. Again,
Thank you so much. Emma Wiesner, member of the European Parliament and delegation to COP28. So thank you so much for being very clear on your wishes of the COP. I have two questions for you. The first one is on the price drop on fossil fuels. As we are now peaking in the use of fossil, do you also predict and forecast price drop? And how would that impact the decarbonization of the emerging economies? And how does that impact the mechanism that the advanced countries need to put in place? That's the first question. The second one is on carbon removals. Has that changed radically since the large World Energy Outlook 2020? Because we now see major projects being deployed. Has that changed, or how is the outlook for energy sector contributing to negative emissions, not only focusing on what that we emit, but also what we absorb from the atmosphere?
Great.
Thank you so much.
Would you pass the mic just behind you, gentlemen? You're the last of the first round. I haven't lost any sight of any of you, I promise you. But can I just say, I'm banning more than one question. You can't have 3 goes. Think of him. So, right? So 1 question each. Please, go on.
Thank you so much. Daniel Bradley from the UK mission to the EU. I enjoyed your 5 for COP28. I wanted to probe a bit on number 3. We've just been talking about oil and gas companies at COP. What would be your bar to entry for oil and gas companies at COP? As a reference point, the UK bar to entry at COP26 was that companies would get no platform unless they came with a very ambitious science-based net zero target. Would you advocate for something that challenging? Because we do need a solution involving big oil and gas. We can't get to 1.5 without having some kind of agreement from them.
And do you think your current Prime Minister would adopt that bar?
Our bar is very, very clear for 2030 and 2050. No change in our...
Despite the, lovely. Thank you very much. I know, sorry, I'm just having fun at you. Fatih, quite a run-through of like many, many issues. You start wherever you wish to.
Now, maybe I start from the one point that the 2 colleagues mentioned, the oil and gas companies. May I just try to attempt to correct one image? When we talk about the oil companies, oil and gas companies, especially in the advanced world, in Europe, in North America, in Japan, we focus on the so-called international oil companies and scrutinize them, and we should. I don't say we shouldn't, but we should. Companies in Europe, in the US, and so on, but they are producing about 13–14% of the oil-related emissions. 85% comes from the nation oil companies in Middle East, in Asia, in here and there. So please, when we talk about the emissions coming from the oil industry, not only the IOCs, so-called international private oil companies, but the national oil companies have also an important share in this, and I want to first mention this point. Now, what should be the minimum? I think those companies, of course, I don't have the authority to let them in, let them out, but I would like to see that the companies at least do 3 things. 1, they should agree to reduce their Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions between now and 2030 by 60%. Second, they should, within that, reduce their methane emissions about 75% between now and 2030, which is very easy, by the way. It is a very easy thing to do. And the third, they should align their investment portfolios by what they say in the public meetings, because many oil and gas company leaders talk about the clean energy, talk about the clean solutions, bulk of their speeches, but when we look at the amount of money they put in their business strategies, their investment portfolios, our numbers show that of the oil and gas industry, the amount of investment going to clean energy solutions less than 5%, 4%, 96% goes to the traditional sources. So there should be a bit of a corrector there. The question from the colleague about the carbon removal. So, in my view, in general, the carbon capture and storage, carbon removal, they are extremely critically important technologies. They were like that before as well, in the last 10, 15 years. But when I look at the last 10, 15 years, we missed the big chance of carbon capture and storage becoming a part of our technology choices. What we have seen in the last 10 years in the carbon removal, carbon capture and storage is a story of disappointment, in my view, a big disappointment. If the oil and gas industry, the countries wouldn't be greedy and put some money in the carbon capture and storage, make it economically affordable, competitive, and technologically much more advanced, today it could have been a very important technology to fight against climate change and the energy security. But still there are some efforts in Norway, in north of Europe, in UK, in United States, in Middle East and elsewhere, but it is yet to be seen whether this time they will be able to make a major improvement. But again, if I have to put one headline, it's a disappointment, the carbon removal. Am I optimistic about the COP28? So I compare COP28 with Paris. So if I compare both of them, there are reasons, there are advantages and disadvantages compared to Paris versus Dubai. I'm talking about the COP, not the cities themselves, because it's a difficult one.
Indeed.
Yeah, exactly. So what I would say is that in Paris, we had one thing which was very important, namely, we had the international mood for cooperation. Remember, President Obama at that time traveled to China to talk with the Chinese, have an agreement on climate, which provided the basis, in my view, for an international agreement coming together. This time, everybody knows the situation between discussions between the US and China, between Russia, Middle East. It couldn't be hardly it could be the more difficult time than we have now for getting an international agreement on any subject, leave aside the climate. But what is the advantage of Dubai versus Paris is the following. When we are in Dubai now, the time we are going to Dubai, the several clean energy technologies are there and competitive. The situation of solar, wind, electric cars, electrolyzers were not so competitive, and they were not going so strongly when we had Paris 2015. So we have the advantage of the clean energy technologies are emerging, but they need a big boost. So whether or not this big boost will come is a question, but we are, in terms of the maturity of the clean energy technologies and their becoming cost effectiveness, we are much better positioned in the Dubai than we were in Paris. Now, in terms of gas and emissions, the Commission question. So, I tell you, to fix the methane emissions problem is one of the easiest thing in the world. Okay? You just need to, basically, you just need a plumber, not more than that for the thing. And the big chunk of the emissions can be reduced, minimized, if not nullified, venting and flaring with very little amount of money, and the companies will make a lot of money for the gas they save, and they can sell it later. But there is not enough regulation and rules and standards in many countries. Therefore, if I was an importer of gas, of country or company or something else, I would be rather worried about the emissions coming from there. And second, if I make a long-term gas import contract, I would be very careful for two reasons. One, am I able to sell my gas, especially for Europe, for example, in Europe, will we need so big amount of gas in 2050, 2060, is a question that I would think twice.
Thank you. You know, you're going to leave us with that image of an international plumber, regardless of his and her diversity, as the solution to methane. Was fantastic, fantastic. Gentleman there who's had, first here on the blue jacket, yourself, yes? Mic is on its way.
Thank you.
No, I'll bring it to you as well, don't worry. But I've only got men's hands up, so please, women in the audience, come on. Go on.
Thank you. My name is Oliver Rapf. I'm the Executive Director of BPI, a think tank focusing on decarbonizing the built environment. You mentioned heat pump success story. You also said that you expect an easing of the gas supply concerns, and you mentioned the doubling of energy efficiency globally. All three come together in the built environment. About 2 years ago, the EU committed to launch a renovation wave, but if we look today, we maybe see a ripple. We're far away from having a wave. One of the reasons for that is that there is no energy renovation service supply. So the problem is not so much on the demand side, it's on the supply side.
So what is your question, sir?
My question is, what would your advice be to the EU to innovate that sector, to define and design an innovation policy for the construction sector so that we have a real renovation energy efficiency service?
Great.
Thank
Just pass your mic to the left. And all of you need to be really, excellent. You need to be brief, really brief. And as I said, not too many questions. One question. What's your
Jean-Louis
question?
Racine, Chief Program Officer at the Clean Cooking Alliance of the UN Foundation. Dr. Burrell, you recently mentioned that clean cooking was the #1 issue for energy and climate in Africa. We've never heard that from the IEA before. So just wondering why now? And what's this initiative that you'll be backing at COP?
Are you questioning motivation? Yes, clearly. Okay, I'm coming to you. We have a lady over there with a second row, hand up there. Very briefly, all of you, please.
Yes, it will be very brief. Milou Berenpoot, working for the European Commission with the Northern African countries. Also on the topic of hydrogen. So European Union has very high ambitions in hydrogen as part of the net zero strategy, with half of its ambition in 2030 expected to come from imports. I understand it may be hard to model in the World Energy Outlook because we're coming from a very low baseline. Is the IEA and the World Energy Outlook also as optimistic about hydrogen as the European Union?
Okay, great. And the gentleman here and the gentleman at the front. That's it. That'll be the last, I'm afraid. Again, please, no descriptors. Question. Because he needs to go.
My name is Jeffrey Seisler from Clean Fuels Consulting, operating out of Washington and Brussels. The EU and a growing number of US states are mandating the sale of zero-emission light-duty vehicles by 2035, which effectively outlaws new internal combustion engine vehicles. Same thing is being discussed for heavy-duty vehicles. But meanwhile, for all these electric vehicles, the full well-to-wheel emissions are being ignored. Meanwhile, renewable fuels like biomethane, even bio-LPG, hydrogen, other
Sir, if I can ask you to get to the question.
Coming there, they'll be able to play a role if they're allowed to outside of the mandates. So the question is, do you believe that mandating the demise of non-electric, low-emission vehicles makes sense when these other options can also contribute to the transition to reducing global warming emissions? In other words, orderly decline, not economic dislocation.
Okay, great. Finally, gentleman here at the front. And again, really, 60 seconds, if you may.
Ercan, Energy Counselor from Permanent Delegation of Turkey to the EU. I'm also a PhD candidate working on critical raw minerals. My question is, 50 years ago, we have a nexus on energy and geopolitics focused on oil. And last year, we have another focus on gas. So what would we do, what should we do as a world to avoid another energy and geopolitics crisis focused on this time on raw critical minerals.
Thank you. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Political leadership might be a good one, potentially. Batting over to you to conclude.
So, thank you very much. The issues, I cannot read my handwriting, so this is... the heat, okay, this is the construction sector. Okay, this is the construction sector. So the construction sector is often undervalued its importance in terms of energy consumption, and here innovation and putting the right mandates for installation and at the same time providing the incentives for the right heating measures is key, but more importantly than that, to make sure to enforcement and to see whether or not these mandates, rules and regulations are observed, if not giving the right signal to the users. I will just jump the clean cooking at the last because it's an important issue. I want to come back. The hydrogen, are we optimistic? Now, I can tell you something. I work on these energy issues many years. For every energy source, there are always different views. Some agree, some disagree, some agree more, some disagree more. But when it comes to hydrogen, everybody loves hydrogen. This is a bit skeptical to me why everybody loves hydrogen so much. And this leads to a bit of a history of as if very soon we are going to see the hydrogen becoming a significant part of our energy portfolio. I don't think so. I don't think it is today. I don't think it is tomorrow, maybe the day after tomorrow. And we must, there are a lot of hydrogen projects coming one after another in terms of the supply, but we have to put attention how to build the demand for hydrogen, how are we going to incentivize the demand. For electric cars or others, for us, important thing is decarbonization of the transportation sector. Electric cars are going very strong around the world. Europe may want to be one of the regions in terms of not only using electric cars, but also in terms of manufacturing. They may have some industrial thoughts behind those regulations. But I believe, for example, biofuels can well be a part of the solution as well. But electric cars, in my view, will determine the future of the car industry very soon. A last question before the clean cooking is what we need to do for the critical minerals shouldn't be the next crisis. It is very simple, diversification. Diversification is important. We have to make sure that the critical minerals exploration and production is not made in a very few countries, many others. There should be incentives for the investment in the critical minerals mining in different parts of the world, but more importantly, the refining of the critical minerals is today also very much concentrated. There is a need for diversification there too. The trap that we fall into in terms of oil and gas shouldn't fall in the context of critical minerals. Last question, the clean cooking. For me, this is an extremely important issue. This is a #1 energy issue, in my view, #1 climate issue in Africa, and especially for Europe, it is in my view, a golden opportunity. We have many colleagues from the European Commission here. If I was working for the European Commission, if I wanted to build a breach of trust between Europe and Africa, I would take the clean cooking as a priority. Today, 4 out of 5 families in Africa use the wood, agricultural waste, animal waste for cooking, which is in turn one of the top 3 reasons for the woman premature deaths in sub-Saharan Africa. It's a gender issue.
Indeed.
Gender issue is not only how many people, male and female, in the boards of the companies. This is a gender issue. Women are dying in order to cook meals for their children. And this is so little amount of money needed in order to solve this problem. 4 billion euros money is needed to provide the clean cooking services. If I was a decision maker in Brussels, I would, and if we want to build a trust between Africa and Europe, Africa is our neighbor here. You need good neighbors in the difficult times. And if you can not only help to address, to solve the problem of, number 1 problem of energy, number 1 problem of gender, a key problem for health, a key problem for climate, but you are going to win the hearts of the Africans forever. There are many other countries who are building bridges, the hospitals there for free or whatever they do, good conditions. Some other countries are sending military, Wagner, and so for Europe, it's a golden opportunity to build good bridges, friendly bridges between Brussels or Europe and Africa, and clean cooking. The financing, helping clean cooking is, in my view, a very good opportunity. So thank you very much for that question.
Thank you. Wow, what can I say? You're a star. And it's a shame it's a short time. We'd like to have much more time, but I know that your time is in demand. But I think it's really important, that last point you make. When you think about the gigantic nature of the problem ahead of us, a 4 billion solution could really transform the relationship. But it's not only about the winning the hearts and minds, it's about the economic growth of Africa, which will create a very different geopolitical balance in the world, and Europe could be playing the role of a value setter as well as a market maker. And Matthew, I hope you're going to take the message back to Ursula tonight, text her and say, Madam, 4 billion is all that's required in terms of your commitment on gender, in your commitment for climate change, but also relationships with Africa and Africa's growth. So let's hope you take that message back with you. Colleagues, thank you all very much. You've been fantastic. It's short and sweet, but take care. Keep an eye on our website, because this conversation that we've just had is going to be writ large in our 10 policy choices that we're creating for the new EU mandate. And we'd love for you to contribute to that and coordinate and engage with us on that. So keep an eye out for that. It's, we're going to be launching it on the 9th of November. It's a shame you can't be there. We'd love you to be there. But you know, one thing that you didn't mention, I'm not asking you to talk about, is India. And I think that we're underestimating what India is lurking beneath the surface, or not so much beneath the surface, in terms of what lessons do you get from the China growth and the India growth? How do we make sense of that? And let's not lose sight of it. But thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you all very much. Take care. Brilliant. Oh.